This morning's Dharma talk is titled, what did I title it?
Why 3 refuges?
Yes, why 3 refuges? Why refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha? What's that about? Well, is that something we could do away with, do without? Maybe. It's a form, it comes down to us from quite a long time ago, along with lots of other forms. So before we even get to the bodhisattva vow of giving up on our own wishes and desires and actually dedicating ourselves to helping others, saving all beings, as it's sometimes said, being with all things, before we even get to that, refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha. Refuge in the Buddha is the example of someone, a human being, not a god, but someone who was sane. And how do I define sanity? This is how I define it. This is gone. No more warfare. I'm not saying this isn't there, but no opposition to any kind of negativity that comes up. You are in a place to realize this yourself. You can realize your own awakened nature, Buddha nature. Might take a while. So refuge in the Buddha, in this situation, what I'm attempting to present and doing as good as I can at it is the Dharma. And so though I'm not the Buddha, obviously, I'm in that kind of a position. I'm in a teaching position. I spent several decades not teaching. So refuge in the teacher, refuge in the Buddha. It's difficult to have some kind of connection with the Buddha unless you have a teaching person who he, she, they can help you make that connection because of their path, because of their practice, because they've, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, it's like baked bread, taking bread out of the oven. It's fresh. It's something that's completely fresh, even though it started, as far as we know, 2,500 years ago. Refuge in the Buddha is the example of someone who is sane. Refuge in the Dharma is the truth that is taught in Buddhism, which is everything is dependently arisen. There's no separate things anywhere. We're not saying they're not separated, but as far as fundamentally, not separate. That's not something you can think your way into, although you might have to do a whole lot of thinking to get to the edge of that cliff. That's why we study all the sutras that we can get our hands on. We can get it in English. Refuge in the Buddha is the example. Refuge in the Dharma as the truth that he taught, which shows up lots of different ways. The Eightfold Path, the 12 links on the chain of existence, 12, what are those called? Nidanas. Need all the help I can get. So those 12 links show us how, in concepts, how ignorance becomes sickness, aging, and death. But first going through a whole lot of iterations of grasping and becoming and so on and so forth. You can study them if you want. So refuge in the Buddha is the example of someone who actually is living that way. Refuge in the Dharma is the truth that he taught, and refuge in the Sangha, or the community. Right now, this is Sangha, whether you consider yourself a Buddhist or not. If you're in this room for half an hour, you're Sangha. If this is what your life is about, then you're Sangha all the time. From the point of view of the teaching person, there isn't anyone who isn't Sangha. They just don't know it. It's just a way of understanding. It's not just like the eight consciousnesses of the Vijnanavada Yogacara tradition. It's just a structure that we take all the mystery and we put the structure on it. And here's the Alaya Vijnana, or the store consciousness. And then there's the seventh consciousness that's the confused mind, the ego mind, the grasping mind, the klesha mind, the paranoid mind, that part of the mind that thinks there is somebody. And then there's just a thinking process, a sixth consciousness that just thinks and actually facilitates the other five sense fields, facilitates them in such a way that you feel like you're one person. Look closely, see if that's true. So Buddha, Dharma, so someone who awoke, wake it up. How does that go? Is it waked? No, I don't care. It's someone who awoke. What did they awake to? They awoke to nothing is separate from anything else. They realized that even though there's consciousness springing forth, there's consciousness that's giving its attention to everything and everyone all the time, receiving, that there's no actual receiver. If you think there's a receiver, that's a misunderstanding. And you'll suffer because everything starts to spin and it's very painful. Anytime you have nerve endings, whether they're on the tips of your fingers or in your consciousness, the area where you dream at, find those nerve endings. I think you're going to teach a course on that soon. Good luck. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So a person who understood what the person taught, and the community of people that are trying to understand what something there clicks when you remember the first time you stumbled into Buddhism. Something about that, if you're in this room, probably something about that was magnetized you. We don't know where that came from particularly. Buddhism is Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is non-theistic. There is not someone else. Not only is there not, you're not looking at someone, you're actually looking at projections. It doesn't look like it, does it? It looks like there's other guys everywhere. Some really good ones, some really bad ones. Let me finish my dithyram here, and then you can take over. Or not. Hold that question, Kevin. So Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So we take refuge, receive refuge. We go to the Buddha for refuge. We go to the Dharma, and we go to the Sangha. That needs to be your refuge if you're going to practice this, or do something else. This is not a corner on the truth necessarily. It's just a way to work with. Suddenly you find yourself, you notice, and you're a little child. Somebody names you, tells you what to do, what not to do. You might have a really good mother and father. You might have a mother and father that are very suffering a lot and are very confused, and it could be really difficult to live with them. It's called karma. So Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Sometimes you might take that formally. You might actually receive those vows. In our tradition, if you receive those vows, you also receive the Bodhisattva vow, being with all beings, being with all things. So, of all these teachings, of the teaching person and what is being taught and the Sangha, don't believe anything. Don't believe a word I say. Please, don't believe it. Don't disbelieve it, and don't ignore it. And live your life that way. Go out, and anytime you see anything, don't believe it. As soon as you believe anything, this is what happens in the mind. It shuts down, and all investigation ceases, or at least most of it. And then we start operating out of judgment, picking and choosing, as it says in the sutra, the disease of the mind. You don't have to pick and choose. If you just, as I say over and over and over again, I know I say it to myself, don't do anything unless you have to. The other word for that is patience. Just hold still and watch what moves. If you're watching what is fluctuating or moving, then your particular body, speech, and mind will find a way to dance with that. And that dancing may not be too comfortable, but at least it'll come out of the, to use a word I don't use often, the interconnectedness of everything. You'll actually find your place in that, and it'll be, it will not be discordant. From the point of view of everything, from the point of view of two people standing next to you, they might not like what you're doing at all. It's not about doing things that please others from the point of view of their desires. And so how can you do that? How can you function where you don't believe, don't disbelieve, and don't look away? Those are the three poisons again: grasping, rejecting, and ignorance, shutting down. Go ahead, Kevin.
What was what did you mean by projections? What you see is a projection.
So projection is just you look at somebody, something, some situation, instead of seeing what it actually is in its essence, you see your ideas about it. So you actually stop short of seeing what it is. And this could be based on hope that it'll be different than you thought. It can be on fear of what you might find if you actually looked at it without believing it, disbelieving it, or turning away. And the turning away is very subtle. I'm not talking about walking away. You can be turning away right while you're looking at it. We all know someone, it might be you. We all know somebody, and when we're talking to them, we can see, it's just like they just cloud over. You know, they're still smiling, and they're still going, yeah, I see what you mean. But they're not really listening to you. We all know someone that never really receives. They take whatever you say, they project their ideas onto it, and then they think they're receiving what you're saying when they're actually receiving what they thought you said or think you said. It's called, in the three own beings, is called parikalpita, or the imaginary nature. We impute ideas about things and settle for that. We end up actually missing our life as it would have been had we just lived in an open dimension of being that leads with a consciousness and not with a thought process. You need the thought process, but if your thought process starts to lead your life, you start to think your way through everything, you're going to run into trouble because you're functioning in a way that can't actually see the complications that are all of the contamination in terms of ignorance, in terms of passion, in terms of aggression. It's very difficult to see it. We just watch the news watch MSNBC for 20 minutes. I mean, it's even the really, really intelligent people that you can sense they're doing their best to be as fair and as understanding. Still, there's a confusion there and this is because these people have no mind training. They start with their thoughts rather than start with the space in which the thoughts appear. I'll say that again. Did you hear it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of a Zen thing. Got to do those every now and then, or I wouldn't be able to stay up here. So just the spaciousness, just that openness. I sometimes say, I'll make a statement about something, and I might say, how do I know that? I don't know it. Knowing and not knowing are also not separate. You can't find two things anywhere. This when one sees this is emptiness. And when one sees deeply what that is, it's compassion. And that compassion is not something you're compassionate to others. I'm not talking about that kind of compassion. You may have to do that also, but I'm talking about something where you're actually, even helping anyone feels just like helping yourself. It's just like covering up your own, ministering to your own wounds, because everywhere you look, you see your own wounds. Yes?
Earlier you said it's not about pleasing others, and it seems the path quality is to put others before ourselves. Do we know the difference between helping and just pleasing people?
So first of all, as you've heard me say, don't meddle with people. Allow them to have their karma. Allow them, even though you see them going in a way that if they were to turn and ask you and say, hey, Shoto, what do you think? Then they're asking you. You say, it doesn't look like a very good idea that you should be headed that way or doing that. But if they're not asking you, mind your own business. In other words, don't make a project of entering into someone else's confusion just because you can see how confused they are. You have to have permission. In other words, they have to be ready to receive the help. Instead of chasing somebody down the street who's bleeding, probably should just let them go. You follow me? I know it's a poor metaphor. It's not really a good metaphor for that. More?
Are we able?
I see you, Joseph.
Can we just please people and not be helping them?
Yes. Yeah, if your idea is being concerned about what people think of you and you're operating out of that, I'm not saying you can't do a little bit of that, but you have to be very aware of what that is. The Sangha is a really powerful place where you have to be, it's just, I can't emphasize that. Sangha is so important, and quite often it is either ignored in the meditation community or Buddhist community, or it's misunderstood what it is. It's a very powerful pot of stew, fighting carrots, you know what I mean? Cabbages, damn carrots. It's that kind of a thing. It's difficult. This is why we here in the monastery, people who are temple or monastery residents, there's issues with people. We have a way of working with that. We sit down, look at each other, and we communicate. Communicate. There's three more things: communicate, cooperate, and then you can collaborate. If you communicate, so that you can see that you get through or get past or have some kind of understanding, you're actually projecting something onto someone, and that you're actually fighting with your projection of someone. And if I see someone doing that, I can't, unless I get permission, I can't step into that. I have to watch what happens. Yes.
You said don't meddle with other people. I get paid to meddle with other people.
Well, that's different.
So I guess I'm wondering how to go into that teacher role when the choice of the students that I'm their teacher is not completely theirs.
Okay, well, that's a structure that they have just by that they're, how old are they?
12, 13, 14.
Yeah, so they're really get to say too much about what they get to do at that point. So yeah, it's a little bit different situation. You're there as a teacher, but I would really spend some time, since you're asking me, I would really spend some time that before you say anything to anybody about what they should or shouldn't do, look right in their eyes, give it 15 seconds. That's a long time looking in somebody's eyes before you say, do this, don't do that. They might even notice people that young are still have not lost their wisdom eye yet. They're also not wise, they're children. More?
What does that look? What do you? Could you say more about the wisdom?
Yeah. You're just looking at them. In other words, you're just present. Just being present is so powerful. If you're just there, they will recognize that if they're that young, more than likely. I mean, I'm not saying that you wouldn't have situations where that might not work at all to be with them. It might scare them, or they might irritate them, or it could be almost anything happen. So, but I'm not doing it so much for them. I'm talking about you.
What is a teacher?
Huh?
What is a teacher?
It's a student.
A teacher is a student.
Yes, of course. You can't teach unless you're a student. You have to be a student all the time. Everything needs to be on receive. You have to give your attention to every damn thing there is. Everybody's scratching your face, somebody writing over here. You have to see. If you focus on something, you ignore everything else. This is why I don't teach shamatha vipassana, even though I practiced it and taught it for decades. I'm not saying that's wrong. Of course, it's great teaching. Somebody wants to teach that, they should do it. Go ahead.
There's a form right now where you're up on the cushion and we're down here.
Yes.
And sometimes in my classroom we do circles.
Yeah.
What's the difference between those two?
Circle is okay. Someone who sits like this is actually functioning as a teacher. I'm sure you've noticed when I get off of this, I stop. I seem kind of stupid. You notice that? Haven't noticed that? Well, you need to pay attention. So it's just another structure. It's a good question, because in our study groups we have kind of a circular situation, and we have one person who is the facilitator, and they're specifically told not to teach. Anytime you have a study situation, no one should be teaching anybody. Supporting other people learning, if you're looking at the Lankavatara Sutra or the Shobogenzo or the Buddhist Unconscious we've been studying by Waldron, work together. Look at the concepts and discuss the concepts, and then the facilitating person, they would make sure that people are included. The people that don't say much, just to facilitate the energy and stay on. If it goes off into the I Ching or something like that, that can be a later class. But you would bring it back to studying on the material. So I think a circle is good. Is that how you teach?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
How's it going?
It's hard, but we're getting better.
I like that.
Poco a poco, little by little.
Sounds good. Sounds like a great thing to do. Yes, Sokuzan.
When somebody stops going to war, what happens to their karma, or how does their karma change?
So it varies. It depends on the force of the karma. It depends on what's been happening for the last 15 years or 20 years, 3 years. In your case, 6 years. It's still dependent. There's still a dependent situation, but it can't find, just because you feel something, the idea with some teachings that you might need to express it or something. And this, the situation of not having any solid self anymore, then whatever comes with the karma, it can't find a self that will own it. So that consciousness doesn't reject it. It doesn't accept it. And it certainly doesn't look away from it. And it's just, if it arises, it arises. If negativity just comes out of nowhere and starts swooping down on you, instead of labeling it depression, you don't do anything with it. As soon as you start naming any emotion that's arising in you, that's coming out of apparent, big A there, apparent past karma or past lives, which we've looked at extensively. Anytime anything is coming from somewhere else, it's insofar as it is looking for someone to have that experience, there's nobody home. So therefore it could stay there, it could rotate around, it could do whatever it wants. It could give you cancer, probably. I don't know. More.
It feels a little bit like, without finding a self, it sounds like you're talking about it not necessarily manifesting, but if it does manifest, does that have anything to do with the self or no self?
How do you mean? Does it have
If
anything?
I had the karma to be violent, and I were to see through the illusory nature of the ego, and that violence can't find a self, might it still find an outlet?
It won't need one, because it's not separate anymore. So it's just energy. It gets depersonalized, and which means that the stories that are attached to it are just stories. Even if it actually happens, this is why it's so difficult, because if somebody actually attacks you and you fight back, then it just becomes very circular. So if somebody attacks you, I'm not saying you shouldn't defend yourself or get away. I'm not saying you need to sacrifice your life or something. But watch very closely what's happening there when someone comes, because then you actually can justify being angry at them. You can justify it, and that's when the self-centered mind comes up with some kind of evidence. All evidence is partial. You can't find proof for anything. If you do, come and talk to me about it. I'd like to hear about that. So when negative feelings are arising, it's the traditional way. I don't know who was Stephen Batchelor, I think, one of the writers, talks about thoughts without a thinker. There's several other teachers that talk about that kind of a situation. I'm not saying it's exactly that way. More?
I guess something we've been discussing a lot about is formalizing some sort of ethics situation here. And
Very much so.
I guess that's where the question's coming from, is that could one be realized and still hurt others?
Physically, are you?
I guess if there's karma that related to whatever causes and conditions, and then one sees through the self that there's a realization that there's not a solid identity functioning, that karma, does it just disappear? Can it still show up as...
Okay, so it's very unlikely, but you can't guarantee anything. And so we don't know. We have this situation. If I've been around longer than anybody here, as far as I can see, and including Mr. Roadhouse back there, right behind you. You can't really guarantee anything. All we know is that in this life, if you can find a way to understand what this whole complex is, this whole self that seems like somebody who has an axe to grind or who can win or lose. If you think you can win or lose, this is confusion. If you think there's a separation between life and death, this is confusion. I'm not saying it isn't separated, but the fundamental nature is it's not separated. And when it comes to karma doesn't really belong to anyone. It's just energy, and it can be extremely intense. And there are dimensions that we don't see here in this low vibration called the physical existence that we don't see. Now, some people actually can see that. There are people in this room that can see much deeper into that realm than I can. But go ahead, finish.
Is there a misunderstanding when we put a teacher in front of us or raise a teacher up a little bit? Not that we shouldn't, but from a student's point of view, is there a misunderstanding of what we think that means?
I think there can be. I think that's part of the ethics situation. I say, when I'm here, I'm functioning as a teacher, but I'm really nobody. I'm not asking for any kind of special guru kind of. I don't use that word. I'm not against it. It helped me when I was very young, but it's risky, that area where you set somebody up higher than you. It's just a form. It's a form, and so there's nothing to believe or disbelieve. The fundamental nature of this is not separate, not separate, not separate. John?
Well, the tricky thing about that question is the word realized. So that's something to think about. Yeah.
Say more, John. What do
You
you?
talked about projections.
Yeah. Do you think there's someone who's realized? Is there?
Do I?
Yeah. Is there anyone realized?
Well, I don't know what that word, how you're using that word, but if it's...
I'm using the word, and then you can do whatever you want with it. Yes or no?
Well, I used to think I knew what that word means, but actually I don't think I do anymore.
Okay.
I've been at this a very long time. And I think when you refer to the difference between me and you refer to age. But there's not much
Darn.
difference. Yeah, so I don't know what that word means. You know, we all like to have setups, and we like to idealize others.
We do.
And we often feel desperate, and so we want that. You know, we
We
want
do.
that idealization. It's very dangerous.
It is. Go ahead.
Sanho down in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Joey's with him. And the question is, what is the non-visual equivalent of looking into someone's eyes?
So Sanho is can't see. I don't know what the technical description is for can't see. Blind, okay. Sanho's a student of mine that's blind. His name means mountain phoenix. I think Sanho, I think that you already know what that is. If you sit in front of in someone's presence and you don't talk, and you put your whole sensorium on receive, it may come through another sense. It may come through a sense of smell. Probably in your case, from what talking I've done with you about this, probably through sound. So, not being blind myself, I don't know for sure, but I would think it's still in the sensorium somewhere. Just be there and be present. I can sense Sanho. I can sense your presence. I can't see you, but I sense your presence, and I'm not magic. Further.
Gyokudo from Minnesota asks, since we are receiving through our own filters, can we really ever know exactly what someone else is saying?
No. You can't. That's powerful. If you understand that's not what I said, but what she said. It's powerful. You can't know that. So quit struggling.
So, since the topic seems to be the three jewels,
Three guys, yeah.
three things.
Three Stooges.
My question is about the
Yes.
the teachings and
Yes.
the Dharma. And first thing that I was introduced to was the Four Noble Truths.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm having a hard time actually verbalizing, but can you actually cessate suffering, or is that a lie?
Yeah, I think it's a teaching device. It's a structure that is meant to talk to people who have no training, no mind training, and this is why it's called provisional teaching. Ultimate teaching is Buddha nature, and just before that is emptiness. That's the Mahayana path. But the beginning path is, okay, we've got 15-year-old kids in ancient India that the Buddha is trying to teach. Probably some older people too, but a lot of them are just young people. So life is suffering. Life is difficult. We all know that, but we kind of cover it up with entertainment or something, and then it goes back into some kind of a stress or some kind of worry or some kind of tension, or maybe some kind of warfare. On some level, it seems to be pretty difficult. And then that's when we get into talking about the realms. You can live most of your life in the heaven realm, which is everything's good. You make money, have a good job, your kids are healthy, you have a place to live. Other people down the road are not doing so well, but you are. Just out of contrast, you have that kind of a better support for being a living being. So that's happening. And then there's 5 other realms that we talk about also. So, but it's something that if you what you're asking about is the third one, which is cessation, the cessation of suffering, and I think it probably is more like the cessation of someone who's suffering. I think the suffering gets more profound because then, if you stop shielding yourself from the world as a separate being, protecting yourself with your ideas, your hopes, your fears, your opinions, then you start giving everything your attention, you start receiving everything. It's a profound form of generosity, is to receive or to give everything your attention. And then so when you do that, all that suffering is coming your way. But when there's no self, when you see that there isn't a solid being, then we realize we're not separate from any suffering. This is a bodhisattva path. So it's not about a bodhisattva who's a really good guy, goes and helps people who are suffering necessarily, like Mother Teresa. Not that I want to take anything away from her, a wonderful person. But the bodhicitta nature, the awakened nature of that, it has to do with no solid being that wins or loses or lives or dies. No solid center. Just this, all the time, not separate. More?
Well, can it still be called suffering?
Could be.
Why would you continue to label something suffering at that point?
You might not. You would. It would depend if you're function like this function here. You would talk about it because that's probably what the person's going through. Anyone in this room that hasn't suffered today? Raise your hand. On some level, something has turned to, what's that word? Huh?
Mush.
Mush. Okay, thank you. I was going for another one. Yeah. Something that you thought was a nice, solid, dependable armrest has squished. Some aspect in your life, and this is the thing. It's as a what was it? I can't remember which guy said this, but I like the quote. Maybe John, you could remember. Samsara is notorious for being without end. Remember that? Huh?
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. We met a long time ago in Chicago when we both were students of Trungpa Rinpoche. Yes.
William Murray up in Grand Rapids asks,
Yes, William.
are all of our thoughts of what our senses perceive projections?
Could you read that? I'm sorry. Could you read that again? I didn't understand that.
Are all of our thoughts of what our senses perceive projections?
Yep. That's with a capital P. Yup. Yes.
Then Anna Maria from Brooklyn, New York.
Anna Maria, where has she been?
It's a multi-part question. When emotions get depersonalized, can anger still be violent? Fear be violent? What does it look like? What form of manifest does it have without housing?
Okay, so Anna Maria, you're not going to be able to figure this out. You're not going to be able to take your intellect, a particular structure of digging through the evidence and try to figure this out. So I would say to function, to respond to that in the way that you're asking it, I would have to say yes and no. I would have to say that because you've by asking the question, you've trapped me with your question. When I say you've trapped me, I haven't trapped anything, but you is she in there?
She's trapped in there.
What are you doing in there, Anna Maria? No, that's right. She's looking through that green eye. Paraphrase your question and keep it really direct and simple. That way I can give you a direct response. I don't know if it'll be an answer, but it'll be a response. Yes.
You mentioned that when the Buddha awoke, he saw receiving, consciousness receiving, but there was no receiver.
What he saw was the Buddha awoke to delusion. When he woke up, he saw delusion everywhere. That was his awakening. That's why it was disappointing.
So I'm making the assumption that the seventh consciousness is the act of receiving, or at least owning the reception.
What?
That sense of I am receiving. I'm wondering how that felt sense of I is not a receiver.
Do it a lot. Do it a lot. So that's why we sit down, hold still, take a symmetrical posture, because body and mind are not separated, but they're not separate fundamentally. We can't find the mind to get it to shape up. So we hold very still in this posture and we watch what continues to churn out thoughts and ideas and hopes and fears. And we watch it and watch it. And at some point you will begin to have what's called a watcher of a watcher. You will look for the one who is watching. Have you done that?
No. Yes? Maybe.
Like that. So I'm not promoting watching the watcher necessarily, but and everyone is a little different. People go through different stages, and there's different ways of working with that. But it seems to be necessary to start somewhere. Start right here with your body, sitting still and watching what is cranking up. You might be watching your breath for a while. You might watch a daydream. You might watch. The example I often give is like if you just watch thoughts that are you're not particularly personalizing them, but you're appreciating them. It's like watching clouds. You know, at some point, the identity with the clouds, the allegiance changes over from grasping or rejecting or believing in or ignoring the clouds over to the sky itself. It's a consciousness that isn't doing much is like the sky that's without clouds. Just to use that as a metaphor. More?
Is consciousness receiving?
I don't know. How's it look to you?
I don't know what
Put on your thinking cap, man.
I get confused by consciousness, what it actually is.
You should. Don't be too. Give it a few years. Give it 10 years before you find out what consciousness is. You're welcome. Thank you. It's time to change over to the other Dharma talk.
Yes.
So those of you who want to stay, we're going to be online. It's a daily Dharma gathering.
5 minutes.
In 5 minutes. So I'll just stay right here.
So we'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our yellow chant books for anybody who needs one there. I'd also like to remind everybody that this Saturday will be the all day, so please join us if you can. And we also accept donations in our donation boxes in the hallway as well as via PayPal and through Square debit and credit cards. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi shi-hu shi-son mu-sa mo-ko-sa mo-ko-ja. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.